GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond-producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109-carat diamond, recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior, with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Jordan Bateman. He's the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome back to the show, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim.
Well, Mike Duffy, after being acquitted on over 30 charges related to bribery, fraud, whatever, he's back in the Senate, and now he's claiming expenses for the same things he was charged for.
Yeah, Mike Duffy is back and badder than ever. That's what happens when people aren't held to account by the courts for their actions. It does show you that the Senate's policy on these things is really weak and needs to be strengthened because, most people would look at it and say what Duffy did was certainly, if not illegal, then unethical. And yet now he's back in there collecting a paycheck and expenses from taxpayers.
Well, basically, the judge said the rules are so muddled, it's virtually impossible for anybody to know if you're obeying or disobeying them.
Yeah, and in fairness to Duffy, we have heard that from many, many different senators from both sides of the aisle. They thought they were in compliance, many of them, with the rules. Turns out they may or may not have been. Some repaid, some didn't. Some faced down court challenges like Duffy did. The thing for us is, as the Taxpayers Federation, at the very least, let's fix the expense rules here and make sure they're crystal clear for everyone. We would go even further and say, why do we need a Senate whatsoever? Let's abolish the thing. But, it just boggles the mind that these guys can continue on wasting your own mine money without being held to account.
Well, speaking of perhaps wasting our money, hearings are planned this summer. Maybe they're underway already to reform the way the Canadian elections are held. Is this a fair way to do it?
Well, look, you want to have consultations and you want to, build into, or you want to get a sense of the public opinion before you decide on the changes to the system. But, there's a few problems here. So the riding I live in Cloverdale Langley City riding. The Liberal MP here, John Aldag, a very nice man. I've known him for many years. He held his first consultation. He's actually on the committee that decides. And it was the day after the BC Day long weekend, Tuesday night. In the middle of summer, 150 people showed up, mainly because the local conservative riding associations, rallied some conservatives to go out, and he sort of poo-pooed that as being a bit partisan. But what kind of actual public consultation are we getting in the middle of summer right after a long weekend? It's not great. CTF, we've been pushing very hard. We actually want electoral reform, but we think it needs to be ratified through a countrywide referendum, making sure that people get a direct vote on how they elect prime ministers and MPs.
What kind of government would you like to see? Fully proportional or a mixture of set ridings and proportional?
Well, for me personally, that's a tough one. I'm still looking at all the different systems from around the world. I think the thing to remember is there is no perfect system, right? One thing that I'm a little bit concerned about when it comes to electoral reform is, we all gnash against the idea of a majority government because the Prime Minister has, what feels like nearly unchecked power. At the same time, minority governments have proven to be much more expensive to taxpayers. Because what happens is all the center-left parties get together, the Greens, the NDP, and the Federal Liberals, and they end up spending a bunch of our dough, trying to please one another and hold together some sort of governing coalition. And we see that all around the world. It also can give rise to, far left and far right parties, which, may or may not be a good thing depending on your point of view. So these are kind of the deeper issues there. I think we need to take a step back and ask, what problem are we trying to solve? If the problem is unchecked power by the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office, whether his last name is Harper or Trudeau or Chrétien or whoever, maybe that's where we should be going first.
Well, yes, there's always that debate how to divide it up. In Canada, at least, though, we do get a budget out of the government. Take a look at the U.S. It took Obama 6 years to get his first budget through.
Yeah, the U.S. is probably not the greatest example of how to get these things done. Although, at the same time, the U.S., the Constitution, built by people who really wanted to do one thing, and that's prevent the rise of dictators or kings. And so they built in all these redundancies into their electoral and democratic system where, one branch has powers over the legislative, one has powers over executive. That creates its own complications. So we need to be really clear, there's no perfect electoral system. There's nothing that's going to make us all feel like every single one of our votes is counted, perfectly. So, that's the first thing is we've got to get rid of this sense that we can find this perfect system that's going to please everyone.
Right. One of the systems I like is Switzerland, where half the seats go to riding, so you get local representation, and the other half are given on the proportion of votes that you get. So you also get a mix of, say, like in Canada, where the Greens can sometimes get 10% of the vote, but they get no seats at all. You have some representation to get those flavors of the month in there.
Yeah, the only thing I'd point out about that, though, is, the Greens could very well then use that 10% of the vote to appoint candidates who have been rejected in a local election. And that to me, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. If you can't get elected in a local riding, should you be able to be appointed by your party simply because the party itself collected enough votes across a bigger geographic area? That would be the one downside of that. But again, there's all sorts of different ways. The Swiss also have that incredible system of referenda and plebiscites where they gauge public opinion on a very regular basis on important issues. That's something that drives a lot of Canadians crazy or Canadian elites crazy because they prefer representative democracy where essentially we elect our MP or our Prime Minister and hand over the keys to the car for 4 years, and how dare we question them until the next election.
Well, a person I know, Sam Frank, has proposed that we have direct democracy. He says with modern technology, smartphones, computers, laptops, everybody in this country is wired to the yin-yang. Why not have Canadians vote more often on important issues that the Commons faces?
Yeah, absolutely. People can vote on important issues. I don't see any problem with that. I don't necessarily agree with the idea of online voting. It's really open to abuse and fraud and a bunch of different problems. I'm very uncomfortable with that because you just don't know who's clicking that button on the other end. But, the basic premise is correct. We have many elections. We have municipal elections. We have provincial. We have federal. There's lots of opportunities to gauge the public's opinion on specific issues, and that's a tool that should be used more.
We'll have more with Jordan Bateman right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jordan Bateman. Getting back to the Senate, somebody like Rafe Mair, I think, suggested that it should be more like a House of Regions. And he doesn't think BC should be part of the West. He said BC is different than Alberta, and take a look at the election results. We certainly are different. So perhaps a House of BC, the Prairies, Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic region to balance off the fact that if you just went with a majority vote, Quebec and Ontario would definitely run the country anyway.
Yeah, the Canadian Constitution does lay out for geographic representation. The problem for BC is we have 6 seats in the Senate. Prince Edward Island has 4 for 100,000 people. We have 6 for 4.5 million. So certainly there are things that need to be addressed there, although good luck trying to wrestle a seat out of Prince Edward Island. The bigger question, though, is why do we even need a Senate? I mean, generally they may tinker around the edges of legislation here and there, providing a so-called sober second look, although many senators have had problems staying sober in the past. So that's another story, Jim. Nonetheless, they very rarely actually change legislation. There's a couple notable examples. Some legislation around union funding disclosures. They basically gutted it. They gutted a bill passed by the House of Commons that would have taken away pensions from politicians convicted of crimes. They took that, they killed that bill. But other than that, it's very rare that they've actually exercised that kind of authority. And in this day and age where we can keep track of our politicians better than ever through social media, the news media, maybe the Senate's an old-fashioned thing that we just don't need anymore.
Right. Now, Prime Minister Trudeau has done something a little different. He said you can nominate yourself for the Senate instead of having it go along party lines. Is that something interesting or just plain weird?
It's weird. I mean, I think Tristin Hopper, the great reporter from the National Post, had a hilarious piece about nominating himself for the Senate. I understand what the Prime Minister's trying to get at, but at the same time, who's going through that process? Ultimately, it'll be the Prime Minister who signs off on the name, and no doubt it'll be people politically connected or people who can provide benefit to the Prime Minister by being appointed to the Senate. It seems like such a goofy process. Alberta tried electing senators. They actually have a list of people who have been ratified by provincial voters waiting for the next opening in the Alberta Senate. Technically, the Prime Minister appoints that person, and by agreement between Alberta and the Prime Minister, they do that. That's interesting. But again, what problem are we trying to solve? Let's just scrap the Senate, pocket the $85 or $90 million a year, put it towards a better cause, and move on.
Perhaps have more MPs, because take a look at places like the Prairie Provinces, BC, where one representative has to cover literally hundreds of thousands of kilometers.
Yeah, well, you think of like Hunter Tutu, who, for all the wrong reasons, now a famous MP from Nunavut, but one MP for that entire territory. That's a lot of space, a lot of people spread over a huge, vast geographical area that he has to represent. So, they have increased MPs. I think it went from 308 to 338 in this last election. What you'd actually like to see is maybe redistribute seats a little bit, take them away from some of the population-poor areas. I mean, do the Maritimes really need almost 30 seats in the House of Commons when there's such a small percentage of the overall population? Probably not, but that won't be popular. Taking some out of Quebec won't be popular, but the West has grown, and as Preston Manning taught us, the West wants in. So looking west to geographically redistribute is probably a good idea.
And now, Jordan, one of your favorite organizations, Translink, the authority that looks after transit in Greater Vancouver. They buy a brand new SeaBus to cross between the city downtown to North Vancouver. And apparently the $21 million vessel does not have air conditioning that works. Yeah. So, Jim, let's say you and I go down to the local car dealership, and we're in the middle of the heat wave here, and we plop down, let's say, $21,000 on a new car. One of the first things that you ask is, how's the air conditioning? Does it work? I don't even know you can get a car anymore, a brand new one without air conditioning probably. But somehow Translink has managed to get a SeaBus with broken down air conditioning and debuted this new vessel in the heat of summer. So pretty unpopular. Tough to open windows as well on a SeaBus. It's so low to the water that they don't really want you tinkering around with their glassed-in areas. So just typical Translink. Customer service has never been their forte, and this is another example of that. Now, this vessel was built overseas, and I know the use every time a new ferry is built and it's in Germany or from Chile, they always say it's the best thing for the taxpayer, but they never factor in, if you build it in BC, all the money is spent in the province, and all the taxes paid on that will go to BC and Canada. And you also build up expertise for building the next vessel, no matter what it is. Do they ever think about things like that when they make these purchases?
Oh, yeah, they factor that in, and still it's a bad deal to build them here. And oftentimes, there are shipbuilding companies here who want to do the work. So is it Seaspan, the one who has the big contract from the Canadian Navy? they simply didn't have space to build more ferries or the SeaBus here, so they took themselves out of the running. Some of these shipbuilding unions could do a big favor by making their wages a little bit more realistic in this day and age and bringing down the cost of building things here. But no, generally the business case is better to go overseas, as uncomfortable as that is for a lot of us.
Well, I did know that we didn't have the capacity, but that's sort of a good news thing then. If you're so busy, you can't take on an extra order.
Yeah, and part of that was that massive shipbuilding exercise. I think the East Coast, Nova Scotia, got a huge whack of money. We got a little bit less, and Quebec got some as well. And each of the three areas are building some of these boats. So a lot of times it's simply because there is no capacity to build on the timelines that are needed.
Right, and of course we're going into a week of very high temperatures where we're expecting temperatures in the 30s, and that's in the 80s and 90s for people not familiar with the Celsius system. And apart from being in what is essentially a floating greenhouse, because it's all glass around the passenger area and the windows can't open or won't because of safety reasons, each person generates 40 to 60 watts of heat. So that's 40,000 watts. Can you imagine if you had 460 watt light bulbs in there? Because that's what the humans are generating.
Never thought of it that way, but you're right. That sounds sweaty and uncomfortable, and no doubt people are pretty glad to get off that boat when it hits the other side. So, yeah, it just comes back to that basic tenet that Translink seems to constantly fail, and that's that customer service. The customer experience needs to be the number one concern. Not, executive pay packages, not, fiefdoms, not, things to make it easier on the staff. Those are all, fine and dandy once the main goal is addressed, which is, is this a pleasant, comfortable, safe, efficient ride for our customers? And until they really get their mind that they need to be a customer organization first, we're going to have more and more problems like this.
Do you have any more faith in the new boss for Translink who came to us from Seattle?
He's been up and down. They fell down on the Compass card, issue with closing gates with folks with a disability. People are still having to call and get someone to come and open those gates. They've done some, a little bit more positive things. More attendance on SkyTrains, more visible. But then you have things like this issue, which again, they need to make this conscious decision. Look, it's about the customer, it's about the ridership experience. Everything else is secondary to that. And until they change that corporate culture, they're going to have these issues pop up again and again.
And I've noticed, too, on weekends and so on, the gates that the handicapped people might use are permanently open.
Yeah, and then, of course, you can hop on without having to tap in, and that causes a bunch of other problems. So, the best solution would have been in the design to have figured out that people with a disability, and look, Jim, I've been to lots of Translink board meetings, annual general meetings. The number one ridership group, the number one customer group that makes their voice heard at those meetings are folks with disabilities. They are always there. They're always pushing for better handy dart. They're always pushing for better service. I mean, the amazing group of people who are self-advocating for better service, and yet Translink continues to let them down again and again. And I think that's probably the most frustrating thing about this is, these groups were talking about this years ago, and, they didn't have a fix, or they ignored them, or thought they would just go away, and, lo and behold, it's another expensive retrofit.
Well, how do you feel, Jordan, that you for years said we need fair gates, there's a lot of cheaters, they said, the cheating rate's 4%. Well, it turned out to be 7%, $250 million lost in potential revenue.
Yeah, it turned out to be much higher than they said. In fact, it's probably even higher than those numbers indicate, because they've done some tinkering with the bus zone systems that lowered their revenue on a different end, and this is more than adequately brought up for that. Fare gates as a business case right now probably still failing, still costs more money than it's rendering in deleted fare evasion. But the reason for that is, they still have this very expensive transit police force. 2/3 of what they do is, or used to do, were fare evasion files. They spend $35 million a year on them. Instead of scrapping that police force and putting half that money towards cheaper SkyTrain attendants, and then saving the money, that would actually make this business case work perfectly. But again, Translink is all about the kingdoms. They never want to give up anything that they've got their grubby hands on, and it seems like that they'll just keep going with the transit police, even though they're very expensive and are quite ineffective.
Well, yes, now that they have the Compass card, the one transit officer I saw in action got to check one ticket during the train ride because it's so complicated to run it through his machine. Before, they would just ask everybody to show their tickets. So they are very, very expensive ticket checkers. Yeah,
they're very glorified fare checkers. I've called them in the past, much to their gnashing of teeth. But a couple of years ago, they did their own internal audit, and the average transit police officer worked on only 12 serious or property crime files a year, one a month. And, frankly, 12 files is a busy or a pretty normal 48-hour period for a Surrey RCMP officer. So, we paid these guys to be fare checkers. That now has changed. The gates are in. We should scrap that force, put half that money into cheaper SkyTrain attendants, and get the people with guns off of our SkyTrain.
And buy some more buses because they're packed every day.
Well, and this is something Derek Corrigan and I talked about a lot during the transit plebiscite was, why aren't they doing the thing that's proven to move people the quickest and easiest and cheapest? That's buses. Everyone wants the big, billion-dollar subway, billion-dollar project to cut ribbons on, but it's buses that are the backbone of this whole transit system. The money just announced by Trudeau earlier this summer, whatever it came out to, $150 million or something overall, doesn't include money for a single bus. It's just perplexing to me that they could spend that much money on a transit system and not even buy one single solitary bus to move people around. But that, again, is Translink and these mayors always chasing the big, concrete miracle, the big cement show-off piece rather than, the unsexy things that actually move people around the region.
Jordan, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Hey, anytime, Jim.
My guest has been Jordan Bateman, the BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. You can find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet or check out our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.